Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I am going to be reading part 2 of Travels with Charley in Search of America by John Steinbeck. I apologize that it has taken so long to get to part 2. A lot of things have happened since I read the first part, including graduation and moving and traveling and starting a new job. So life has been hectic, to say the least. But I have finally started to get back into making videos for you guys, and part 1 was such a hit, and I love this book so much, so I figured why not continue with our little series of reading it. And yeah, so today is going to be part 2. And like I said in the first one, the book is originally split up into 4 different parts, I believe. But because they're so long, I had to split those parts up into parts. So this is part 2. Here we go. In long-range planning for a trip, I think there is a private conviction that it won't happen. As the day approached, my warm bed and comfortable house grew increasingly desirable, and my dear wife incalculably precious. To give these up for 3 months for the terrors of the uncomfortable and the unknown seemed crazy. I didn't want to go. Something had to happen to forbid my going, but it didn't. I could get sick, of course, but that was one of my main but secret reasons for going at all. During the previous winter, I had become rather seriously ill with one of those carefully named difficulties which are the whispers of approaching age. When I came out of it, I received the usual lecture about slowing up, losing weight, limiting the cholesterol intake. It happens to many men, and I think doctors have memorized the litany. It had happened to so many of my friends. The lecture ends, "Slow down. You're not as young as you once were." And I had seen so many begin to pack their lives in cotton wool, smother their impulses, hood their passions, and gradually retire from their manhood into a kind of spiritual and physical semi-invalidism. In this they are encouraged by wives and relatives, and it's such a sweet trap. Who doesn't like to be the center for concern? A kind of second childhood falls on so many men. They trade their violence for the promise of a small increase of lifespan. In effect, the head of the house becomes the youngest child, and I have searched myself for this possibility with a kind of horror, for I have always lived violently, drunk usually, eaten too much or not at all, slept around the clock or missed 2 nights of sleeping, worked too hard and too long in glory, or slogged for a time in utter laziness. I have lifted, pulled, chopped, climbed, made love with joy, and taken my hangovers as a consequence, not as a punishment. I did not want to suffer fierceness for a small gain in yardage. My wife married a man. I saw no reason why she should inherit a baby. I knew that 10 or 12,000 miles driving a truck alone and unattended over every kind of road would be hard work, but to me it represented the antidote for the poison of the professional sick man. And in my own life, I am not willing to trade quality for quantity. If this projected journey should prove to be too much, then it was time to go anyway. I see too many men delay their exits with a sickly, slow reluctance to leave the stage. It's bad theater as well as bad living. I am very fortunate in having a wife who likes being a woman, which means that she likes men, not elderly babies. Although this last foundation for the journey was never discussed, I am sure she understood it. The morning came, a bright one with the tawny look of autumn in the sunlight. My wife and I parted very quickly, since both of us hate goodbyes, and neither one of us wanted to be left when the other had gone. She gunned her motor and exploded away for New York, and I, with Charley beside me, drove Rocinante to the Shelter Island ferry, and then to a second ferry to Greenport, and a third from Orientport to the coast of Connecticut, across Long Island Sound, for I wanted to avoid New York traffic and get well on my way, and I confessed to a feeling of gray desolation. On the ferry deck, the sun was sharp, and the coast of the mainland only an hour away. A lovely sloop stood away from us, her genoa set like a curving scarf, and the coastal craft trudged up the Sound or wallowed heavily toward New York. Then a submarine slipped to the surface half a mile away, and the day lost part of its brightness. Farther away, another dark creature slashed through the water, and another. Of course, they are based in New London, and this is their home. And perhaps they are keeping the world's peace with this venom. I wish I could like submarines, for then I might find them beautiful. But they are designed for destruction, and while they may explore and chart the sea bottom and draw new trade lines under the Arctic ice, their main purpose is threat. And I remember too well crossing the Atlantic on a troop ship, knowing that somewhere on the way the dark things lurked, searching for us with their single-stalk eyes. Somehow the light goes bleak for me when I see them, and remember burned men pulled from the oil-slicked sea. And now submarines are armed with mass murder, our silly, only way of deterring mass murder. Only a few people stood in the wind on the top deck of the clanking iron ferry boat. A young man in a trench coat with corn-silk hair and delphinium eyes, red-edged by the dull wind, turned to me and then pointed. "That's the new one," he said. "She can stay down 3 months. "How can you tell them?" "I know them. I'm on them." "Atomic?" "Not yet, but I've got an uncle on one, and maybe pretty soon." "You're not in uniform?" "Just had leave." "Do you like to serve on them?" "Sure I do. The pay's good, and there's all kinds of future." "Would you like to be downed for 3 months?" "You get used to it. The food's good, and there's movies, and I like to go under the pole. Wouldn't you?" "I guess I would. And there's movies and all kinds of future." "Where are you from?" "From over there, New London. Born there. My uncle's in the service, and 2 cousins. I guess we're kind of a submarine family." "They worry me." "Oh, you'd get over that, sir. Pretty soon you wouldn't even think you were submerged, that is, if you haven't got something wrong with you. Ever had claustrophobia?" "No." "Well then, you soon get used to it. Care to go below for a cup of coffee? There's plenty of time." "Sure I would." And could be he's right and I'm wrong. It's his world, not mine anymore. There's no anger in his delphinium eyes, and no fear and no hatred either. So maybe it's all right. It's just a job with good pay and a future. I must not put my memories and my fear on him. Maybe it won't be true again, but that's his lookout. It's his world now. Perhaps he understands things I will never learn. We drank our coffee out of paper cups, and through the square ferry windows he pointed out the dry docks and the skeletons of new submarines. Nice thing about it is if there's a storm you can submerge, and it's quiet. Sleep like a baby and all hell busting up loose up above. He gave me directions for getting out of town, some of the few accurate ones I got on the whole trip. "So long," I said. "I hope you have a good future." "It's not bad, you know. Goodbye, sir." And driving along a black Connecticut tree-bordered and gardened road, I knew he had made me feel better and surer. For weeks I had studied maps, large scale and small, but maps are not reality at all. They can be tyrants. I know people who are so immersed in road maps that they never see the countryside they pass through, and others who, having traced a route, are held to it as though by flamed wheels to rails. I pulled Rocinante into a small picnic area maintained by the state of Connecticut and got out my book of maps, and suddenly the United States became huge beyond belief and impossible to ever cross. I wondered how and how I got myself mixed up in the project that couldn't be carried out. It was like starting to write a novel. When I faced the desolate impossibility of writing 500 pages, a sick of sense failure followed me, and I know I can never do it. This happens every time. Then gradually I write 1 page, and then another. One day's work is all I can permit to myself to contemplate, and eliminate the possibility of ever finishing. So it was now, as I looked at the bright-colored projection of Monster America. The leaves of the trees about the campground were thick and heavy, no longer growing but hanging limp and waiting for the first frost to whip them with color and the second to drive them to the earth and terminate their year. Charley is a tall dog. As he sat up in the seat beside me, his head was almost as high as mine. He put his nose close to my ear and said, "Pfft." He's the only dog I ever knew who could pronounce the constant F. This is because his front teeth are crooked, a tragedy which keeps him out of dog shows because his upper front teeth slightly engage his lower lip. Charley can pronounce F. The word "pfft" usually means he would like to salute to a bush or tree. I opened up the cab door and let him out, and he went about his ceremony. He doesn't have to think about it to do it well. It is my experience that in some areas Charley is more intelligent than I am, but in others he is abysmally ignorant. He can't read, can't drive a car, and has no grasp of mathematics. But in his own field of endeavor, which he was now practicing, the slow imperial smelling over and annotating of an area, he has no peer. Of course his horizons are limited, but how wide are mine? We drove on in the autumn afternoon heading north because I was self-contained. I thought it might be nice if I could invite people I met along the way to my home for a drink, but I had neglected to lay in liquor. But there are pretty little bottle stores on the back roads of the state. I knew there were some dry states, but had forgotten which they were, and it was just as well to stock up. A small store was set well back from the road in a grove of sugar maples. It had a well-kept garden and flower boxes. The owner was a young old man with a gray face, I suspected teetotaler. He opened his order book and straightened the carbons with patient care. You never know what people will want to drink. I ordered bourbon, scotch, gin, vermouth, vodka, a medium good brandy, aged applejack, and a case of beer. It seemed to me that those might take care of most situations. It was a big order for a little store. The owner was impressed. Must be quite a party. No, it's just traveling supplies. He helped me carry the cartons out, and I opened Rocinante's door. You going in that? Sure. Where? All over. And then I saw what I was going to see so many times on the journey, a look of longing. Lord, I wish I could go. Don't you like it here? Sure, it's all right, but I wish I could go. You don't even know where I'm going. I don't care. I'd like to go anywhere. Eventually, I had to come out of the tree-hidden roads and do my best to bypass the cities. Hartford and Providence and such are big cities, bustling with manufacturing, lousy with traffic. It takes far longer to go through cities than to drive several hundred miles, and in the intricate traffic pattern as you try to find your way through, there's no possibility of seeing anything. But now I have been through hundreds of towns and cities in every climate against every kind of scenery, and of course they are all different, and the people have points of difference, but in some ways they are alike. American cities are like badger holes, ringed with trash, all of them, surrounded by piles of ragged and rusting automobiles, and almost smothered with rubbish. Everything we use comes in boxes, cartons, bins, the so-called packaging we love so much. The mountains of things we throw away are much greater than the things we use. In this, if in no other way, we can see the wild and reckless exuberance of our production, and always seems to be the index. Driving along, I thought about how in France or in Italy, every item of these thrown-out things would have been saved and used for something. This is not said in criticism of one system or the other, but I do wonder whether there will come a time where we can no longer afford our wastefulness. Chemical wastes in the rivers, metal wastes everywhere, and atomic wastes buried deep in the earth or sunk in the sea. When an Indian village became too deep in its own filth, the inhabitants moved, and we have no place to which to move. I had promised my youngest son to say goodbye in passing his school in Deerfield, Massachusetts, but I got there too late to arouse him, so I drove up the mountain and found a dairy, bought some milk, and asked permission to camp under an apple tree. The dairyman had a PhD in mathematics, and he must have had some training in philosophy. He liked what he was doing, and he didn't want to be somewhere else, one of the very few contented people I met in my whole journey. I prefer to draw a curtain over my visit to Eagle Brook School. It can be imagined what effect Rocinante had on 200 teenage prisoners of education just settling down to serve their winter sentence. They visited my truck in droves, as many as 15 at a time in the little cabin, and they looked courteous curses at me because I could go and they could not. My own son will probably never forgive me. Soon after I drove off, I stopped to make sure there were no stowaways. My route went through North Vermont and then in the east to New Hampshire in the White Mountains. The roadside stands were piled with golden pumpkins and russet squashes and baskets of red apples so crisp and sweet that they seemed to explode with juice when I bit into them. I bought apples and a gallon jug of fresh-pressed cider. I believe that everyone along the highways sells moccasins and deerskin gloves, and those who don't sell goat milk candy. Until then, I had not seen the factory outlet stores in the open country selling shoes and clothes. The villagers are the prettiest, I guess, in the whole nation, neat and white painted, and, not counting the motels and tourist courts, unchanged for 100 years except for traffic and paved streets. The climate changed quickly to cold, and the trees burst into color, the reds and yellows you can't believe. It is only color, but it glowing, as though the leaves gobbled in the light of the autumn sun, and then released it slowly. There's a quality of fire in these colors. I got high in the mountains before dusk. A sign beside a stream offered fresh eggs for sale, and I drove up a farm road and bought some eggs and asked permission to camp beside the stream and offered to pay. The farmer was a spare man, with what we think of as a Yankee face and the flat vowels we consider Yankee pronunciation. "No need to pay," he said. "The land's not working, but I would like to look at that rig you've got there." I said, "Let me find a level pace and put it in order, then come down for a cup of coffee or something." I backed and filled until I found a level place where I could hear the eager stream rattling. It was almost dark. Charley had said several times, meaning this time he was hungry. I opened Rocinante's door, turned on the light, and found utter chaos inside. I have stowed a boat very often against roll and pitch, but the quick stops and starts of a truck are a different hazard. The floor was littered with books and papers. My typewriter roosted uncomfortably on a pile of plastic dishes. A rifle had fallen down and nudged itself against the stove, and one entire ream of paper, 500 sheets, had drifted like snow to cover the whole place. I lighted the gas mantle lamp and stuffed the debris in a little closet and put on water for coffee. In the morning, I would have to reorganize my cargo. No one can tell how to do it. The technique must be learned the way I learned it, by failures. The moment it was dark, it became bitterly cold, but the lamp and the gas burners of the stove warmed my little house cozily. Charley ate his supper, did his tour of duty, and retired into a carpeted corner under the table, which was to be his for the next 3 months. There are so many modern designs for easy living. On my boat, I had discovered the aluminum, disposable cooking utensils, frying pans, and deep dishes. You fry a fish and throw the pan overboard. I was well equipped with these things. I opened a can of corned beef hash and patted it into a disposable dish and set it on an asbestos pad over a low flame to heat very slowly. The coffee was barely ready when Charley let out his lion roar. I can't say how comforting it is to be told that someone is approaching in the dark, and if the approacher happened to have evil in his heart, that great voice would give him pause if he did not know Charley's basically pacific and diplomatic nature. The farm owner knocked on my door, and I invited him in. "You got it nice in here," he said. "Yes, sir, you've got it nice." He slipped in the seat beside the table. His table can be lowered at night, and the cushions can be converted to make a double bed. "Nice," he said again. I poured him a cup of coffee. It seems to me that coffee smells even better when the frost is in. "A little something on the side?" I asked, "something to give it authority?" "No, this is fine. This is nice." "Not a touch of Applejack? I'm tired from driving. I'd like a spot myself." He looked at me with the contained amusement that is considered taciturnity by non-Yankees. "You could have one if I didn't." "No, I guess not." "I wouldn't rob you then, just a spoonful." So I poured each of us a good dollop of 21-year-old Applejack and sipped it on my side of the table. Charley moved over to make room and put his chin down on my feet. There's a gentility on the road. A direct or personal question is out of bounds, but this is simple good manners anywhere in the world. He did not ask my name nor I his, but I had seen his quick eyes go to the firearms in their rubber slings, to the fishing rods pointed against the wall. Khrushchev was at the United Nations, one of the few reasons I would have liked to be in New York. I asked, "Have you listened to the radio today?" 5 o'clock report? What happened at the UN? I forgot to listen. "You wouldn't believe it," he said. Mr. K took off his shoe and pounded the table. "What for? Didn't like what was being said." Seems like a strange way to protest. "Well, it got attention. That's about all the news talked about today." "They should give him a gavel so he could keep his shoes on." "That's a good idea. Maybe it could be in the shape of a shoe so he wouldn't be embarrassed." He sipped the Applejack with a deep appreciation. "That's pretty nice," he said. "How do folks around here feel about all this talking back to the Russians?" "I don't know about other people, but I think as if you're talking back, it's kind of like a rear guard action. I like to see us do something, so they had to talk back to us." "You got something there." "Seems to me we're always defending ourselves." I refilled the coffee cups and poured a little more Applejack for both of us. You think we should attack? I think we should at least take the ball sometimes. I'm not taking a poll, but how does the election seem to be going around here? I wish I knew, she said. People aren't talking. I think this might be the secretest election we ever had. People just won't put out an opinion. Could it be they haven't got one? Maybe, or maybe they just don't know what to tell. I remember other elections when there would be pretty peppery arguments. Haven't heard even one. And that's what I found all over the country. No arguments, no discussion. Is it the same? Other places? He must have seen my license plate. We would not mention that. That seems right to me. You think that people are scared to have an opinion? Maybe some, but I know that some don't scare, and they don't say either. That's been my experience, I said, but I don't know, really. I don't either. Maybe it's all part of the same thing. No thanks, no more. I can smell your supper's nearly ready. I'll step along. Part of what same thing? Well, you take my grandfather and his father. He was still alive until I was 12. They all knew some things they were sure about. They were pretty sure give a little line and then what might happen. But now, what might happen? I don't know. Nobody knows. What's good is an opinion if you don't know. My grandfather knew the number of whiskers in the Almighty's beard. I don't even know what happened yesterday, let alone tomorrow. He said he knew what it was that makes a rock or a table. I don't even understand the formula that says nobody knows. We've got nothing to go on, got no way to think about things. I'll step along. Will I see you in the morning? I don't know. I'm going to start early. I'm going to clear across Maine to Deer Isle. Say, that's a pretty place, isn't it? I don't know yet. I haven't been there. Well, it's nice. You'll like it. Thanks for the coffee. Good night. Charley looked after him and sighed and went back to sleep. I ate my corned beef hash and then made down my bed and dug out Shearer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. But I found I couldn't read, and when the light was off, I couldn't sleep. The clattering stream on the rocks was good, responsible sound, but the conversation of the farmer stayed with me. A thoughtful, articulate man he was. I couldn't hope to find many like him, and maybe he had put his finger on it. Humans had perhaps a million years to get used to fire as a thing and as an idea, between the time a man got his fingers burned on a lightning-struck tree until another man carried some inside a cave and found it kept him warm. Maybe 100,000 years, and from there to the blast furnaces of Detroit. How long? And now a force was in hand, how much more strong. We hadn't had time to develop the means to think. For man has to have feelings and then words before he can come close to thought, and, in the past tense at least, that has taken a long time. Roosters were crowing before I went to sleep, and I felt at last my journey had started. I think I hadn't really believed in it before. Charley likes to get up early, and he likes to get me up early too. And why wouldn't he? Right after his breakfast, he goes back to sleep. Over the years, he has developed a number of innocent-appearing ways to get me up. He can shake himself and his collar loud enough to wake the dead. If that doesn't work, he gets a sneezing fit. But perhaps the most irritating method is to sit quietly beside the bed and stare into my face with a sweet and forgiving look on his face. I come out of a deep sleep with the feeling of being looked at, but I have learned to keep my eyes tight shut. And if I even blink, he sneezes and stretches, and that night's sleep is over for me. Often the war of wills goes on for quite a time, I squinching my eyes shut and he forgiving me, but he nearly always wins. He liked traveling so much he wanted to get started early, and early for Charley is the first tempering of darkness with the dawn. I soon discovered that if a wayfaring stranger wishes to eavesdrop on a local population, the places for him to slip in and hold his peace are bars and churches. But some New England towns don't have bars, and churches only on Sunday. A good alternative is the roadside restaurant where men gather for breakfast before going to work or going hunting. To find these places inhabited, one must get up very early. And there is a drawback to even this. Early rising men not only do not talk much to strangers, they barely talk to one another. Breakfast conversation is limited to a series of laconic grunts. The natural New England taciturnity reaches its glorious perfection at breakfast. I fed Charley, gave him a limited promenade, and then hit the road. An icy mist covered the hills and froze on my windshield. I'm not normally a breakfast eater, but here I had to be, or I wouldn't see anybody unless I stopped for gas. At the first lighted roadside restaurant, I pulled in and took my seat at a counter. The customers were folded over their coffee cups like ferns. A normal conversation is as follows. Same? Yep. Cold enough for you? Yep. 10 minutes later. Refill? Yep. This is a really talkative customer. Some reduce it to burp, and others do not answer at all. An early morning waitress in New England leads a lonely life, but I soon learned that if I tried to interject life and gaiety into her job with a blithe remark, she dropped her eyes and answered yep or umph. Still, I did feel that there was some kind of communication, but I can't say what it was. The best of learning came on the morning radio, which I learned to love. Every town of a few thousand people has its station, and it takes the place of the old local newspaper. Bargains and trades are announced, social doings, prices of commodities, messages. The records played are the same all over the country. If Teenage Angel is top of the list in Maine, it's top of the list in Montana. In the course of a day, you may hear Teenage Angel 30 or 40 times. But in addition to local news and chronicles, some foreign advertising creeps in. As I went farther and farther north and it got colder, I was aware of more and more advertising for Florida and real estate, which, with the approach of the long and bitter winter, I could see why Florida is a golden word. As I went along, I found that more and more people lusted toward Florida, and that thousands had moved there and more thousands wanted to and would. The advertising, with a side look at federal communications, made a few claims except for the fact that the land they were selling was in Florida. Some of them went out on a limb and promised that it was above tide level, but that didn't matter. The very name Florida carried the message of warmth and ease and comfort. It was irresistible. I've lived in good climate, and it bores the hell out of me. I like weather rather than climate. In Cuernavaca, Mexico, where I once lived, and where the climate is as near to perfect as conceivable, I have found that when people leave there, they usually go to Alaska. I like to see how long an Aroostook County man can stand in Florida. The trouble is that with his savings moved and invested there, he can't very well go back. His dice are rolled and can't be picked up again. But I do wonder if the down Easter, sitting on a nylon and aluminum chair out on a changelessly green lawn, slapping mosquitoes in the evening of a Florida October, I do wonder if the stab of memory doesn't strike him high in the stomach, just below the ribs where it hurts. And in the humid ever summer, I dare his picturing mind not to go back to the shout of color and the clean rasp of frosty air, to the smell of pine wood burning and the caressing warmth of kitchens. For how can one know color in perpetual green, and what good is warmth without cold to give it sweetness? I drove as slowly as custom and the impatient law permitted. That's the only way to see anything. Every few miles, the states provided places of rest off the roads, sheltered places sometimes near dark streams. There were painted oil drums for garbage and picnic tables, and sometimes fireplaces or barbecue pits. At intervals, I drove Rocinante off the road and let Charley out to smell over the register of previous guests. Then I would heat my coffee and sit comfortably on my back step and contemplate wood and water and the quick-rising mountains with crowns of conifers and the fir trees high up, dusted with snow. Long ago at Easter, I had a looking egg. Peering in the little porthole at the end, I saw a lovely little farm, a kind of dream farm, and on the farmhouse chimney a stork sitting on a nest. I regarded this as a fairy tale farm, as surely imagined as gnomes sitting under toadstools. And then in Denmark I saw that farm, or its brother, and it was true, just as it had been in the looking egg. And in Salinas, California, where I grew up, although we had some frost, the climate was cool and foggy. When we saw colored pictures of a Vermont autumn forest, it was another fairy tale thing we frankly didn't believe. In school, we memorized Snowbound and little poems about old Jack Frost and his paintbrush. But the only thing Jack Frost did for us was put a thin skin of ice on the watering trough, and that rarely. To find not only that this bedlam of color was true, but that the pictures were pale and inaccurate translations was, to me, startling. I can't even imagine the forest colors when I am not seeing them. I wondered whether constant association could cause inattention, and asked a native New Hampshire woman about it. She said the autumn never failed to amaze her. Too late. It's a glory, she said, and can't be remembered, so that it always comes as a surprise. In the stream beside the resting place, I saw a trout rise from the dark water of a pool and make outflowing silver rings, and Charley saw it too. He waded in and got wet, the fool. He never thinks of the future. I stepped into Rocinante to bring out my poor mite of garbage for the oil drum. 2 empty cans. I had eaten from one and Charley from the other. And among the books I had brought along, I saw a well-remembered cover and brought it out to the sunlight, a golden hand holding it at once a serpent and a mirror with wings, and below in script-like letters, The Spectator, edited by Henry Morley. I seem to have had a fortunate childhood for a writer. My grandfather, Samuel Hamilton, loved good writing, and he knew it too, and he had some blue-stocking daughters, among them my mother. Thus it was that in Salinas, in the great dark walnut bookcase with the glass doors, there were strange and wonderful things to be found. My parents never offered them, but the glass doors obviously guarded them, so I pilfered from the case. It was neither forbidden nor discouraged. I think that today, if we forbade our illiterate children to touch the wonderful things of our literature, perhaps they might steal them and find secret joy. Very early I conceived a love for Joseph Addison, which I have never lost. He plays the instrument of language as casuals play a cello. I do not know whether he influenced my prose style, but I could hope he did in time. In the White Mountains in 1960, sitting in the sun, I opened the well-remembered first volume, printed in 1883. I turned to number 1 of The Spectator, Thursday, March 1st, 1711. It was headed, Non fumum ex fulgore, sed ex fumo dare lucem, cogitat et speciosa dehinec miracula promat. I remember so well loving Addison's use of capital letters for nouns. He writes under the state, I have observed that a reader seldom pursues a book with pleasure, till he knows whether the writer of it be a black or a fair man, of a mild or choleric disposition, married or a bachelor, with other particulars of the like nature that conduce very much to the right understanding of an author. To gratify this curiosity, which is so natural to a reader, I design this paper and my next as prefatory disclosures to my following writings, and shall give some account in them of the several persons that are engaged in this work. As the chief trouble of compiling, digesting, and correcting will fall to my share, I must do myself justice to open the work with my own history. Sunday, January 29th, 1961. Yes, Joseph Addison, I hear you, and I will obey with reason, for it appears that the curiosity you speak of has in no way abated. I have found many readers more interested in what I wear than what I think, more avid to know how I do it than in what I do. In regarding my work, some readers profess greater feeling for what it makes than for what it says. Since a suggestion from the master in command, not unlike Holy Writ, I shall digress and comply at the same time. Among the generality of men, I am tall, 6 feet even, although among the males of my family I am considered a dwarf. They range from 6 feet 2 to 6 feet 5, and I know that both my sons, when they stretch their full height, will overtop me. I am very wide of shoulder, and, in the condition I now find myself, narrow of hip. My legs are long in proportion to my trunk, and are said to be shapely. My hair is a grizzled gray, my eyes blue, and my cheeks ruddy, a complexion inherited from my Irish mother. My face has not ignored the passage of time, but recorded it with scars, lines, furrows, and erosions. I wear a beard and mustache, but shave my cheeks. Said beard, having a dark skunk stripe up the middle and white edges, commemorates certain relatives. I cultivate this beard not for the usual given reason of skin trouble or pain of shaving, nor for the secret purpose of covering a weak chin, but as a pure, unblushing decoration, much as of a peacock finds pleasure in his tail. And finally, in our time, a beard is one thing a woman cannot do better than a man, or if she can, her success is sure only in a circus. My costume for traveling was utilitarian, if a trifle bizarre. Half Wellington rubber boots with a cork inner sole kept my feet warm and dry. Khaki cotton trousers, bought in an army surplus store, covered my shanks, while my upper regions rejoiced in a hunting coat and with corduroy cuffs and a collar and a game pocket in the rear, big enough to smuggle an Indian princess into a YMCA. My cap was one I have worn for many years, a blue serge British naval cap with a short visor, and on its peak the royal lion and unicorn, as always fighting for the crown of England. This cap is pretty ratty and salt-crusted, but it was given to me by the skipper of a motor torpedo boat on which I sailed out of Dover during the war, a gentle gentleman and a murderer. After I left his command, he attacked a German E-boat and held his fire, trying to take it whole since none had ever been captured, and in the process he got himself sunk. I have worn this cap ever since in his honor and his memory. Besides, I like it. It agrees with me. Down east, this cap did not draw a second glance. But when later in Wisconsin, North Dakota, Montana, I had left the sea far behind, I thought it drew attention, and I bought what we used to call a stockman's hat, a Stetson, not too wide of brim, a rich but conservative Western hat of the kind my cow-hearing uncles used to wear. Only when I came down to another sea in Seattle did I resume the naval cap. Thus far with Edison's injunction, but my reader has me back in the New Hampshire picnic place. As I sat there fingering the first volume of The Spectator and considering how the mind usually does two things at once that it knows about and probably several it doesn't, a luxurious car drove in, and a rather stout and bedizened woman released a rather stout and bedizened Pomeranian from the female persuasion. I would not have known this latter fact, but Charley knew. Emerging from behind the garbage can, he found her beautiful. His French blood flared up, and he proceeded to gallantries unmistakable even to the slack eye of Mademoiselle's mistress. This creature let out a shriek, like a wounded rabbit, emerged from the car with an explosive ooze, and would have snatched her darling to her bosom if she could have bent down that far. The best she could do was fetch a slap at tall Charley's head. He quite naturally and casually took a nip at her hand before proceeding toward romance. Until that moment, I never quite knew the meaning of the phrase, to make the welkin ring. In the first place, I didn't know what a welkin was. I looked it up later, and that bull bitch of a woman sure as hell made it ring. I grabbed her hand and saw that the skin wasn't even broken, so I grabbed her dog, which promptly bit me good and drew blood before I could get the little monster by the throat and gently throttle it. Charley regarded the whole scene as nonsense. He wet on the garbage can for the 20th time and called it a day. It took time to calm the lady. I brought out the bottle of brandy which might have killed her, and she took a slug that should have killed her. After all I've done for him, you'd think Charley would have come to my aid, but he dislikes neurotics and he detests drunks. He climbed in Rocinante, crawled under the table, and went to sleep. Sic semper cum frogs. At last, milady flailed away with her handbrake on, and the kind of day I had built lay in ruins. Addison had crashed in flames, and the trout no longer ringed in the pool, and a cloud covered the sun and put a chill in the air. I found myself driving faster than I wanted to, and it began to rain, a cold steel rain. I didn't give the lovely villages the attention they deserved, and before long I had crossed into Maine and continued eastward. I wish any two states could get together on a speed limit. Just about the time you get used to 55 miles an hour, you cross the state line, and now it's 65. I wonder why they can't settle down and agree. However, in one matter all states agree. Each one admits it is the finest of all and announces that fact in huge letters as you cross the state line. Among nearly 40, I didn't see a single state that hadn't a good word to say for itself. It seemed a little indelicate. It might have been better to let visitors find out for themselves, but maybe we wouldn't if we weren't drawn to our attention. Preparation for the winter in New England is drastic. The summer population must be large, and the roads and highways gorged with refugees from the sticky heat of Boston and New York. Now the hot dog stands and ice cream parlors, the curiosity shops, deerskin moccasin and glove places were all shuttered and closed, many of them with cards saying open next summer. I can never get used to the thousands of antique shops along the roads, all bulging with authentic and attested trash from an earlier time. I believe the population of the 13 colonies was less than 4 million souls, and every one of them must have been frantically turning out tables, chairs, china, glass, candle molds, and oddly shaped bits of iron, copper, and brass for future sale to 20th century tourists. There are enough antiques for sale along the roads of New England alone to furnish the houses of a population of 50 million. If I were a good businessman and cared a tittle for my unborn great-grandchildren, which I do not, I would gather all the junk and the wrecked automobiles, comb the city dumps, and pile these gleanings in the mountains and spray the whole thing with that stuff the Navy uses to mothball ships. At the end of 100 years, my descendants would be permitted to open this treasure trove and would be the antique kings of the world. If the battered, cracked, and broken stuff of our ancestors try to get rid of now brings so much money, think of what a 1954 Oldsmobile or a 1960 Toastmaster will bring. And a vintage warring mixer. Lord, the possibilities are endless. Things we have to pay to have hauled away could bring fortunes. If I seem to be over-interested in junk, it's because I am, and I have a lot of it too. Half a garage full of bits and broken pieces. I use these things for repairing other things. Recently, I stopped my car in front of the display yard of a junk dealer near Sag Harbor. As I was looking curiously at the stock, It suddenly occurred to me that I had more than he had. But it can be seen that I do have a genuine and almost miserly interest in worthless objects. My excuse is that in this era of planned obsolescence, when a thing breaks down, I can usually find something in my collection to repair it. A toilet or a motor or a lawnmower. But I guess the truth is that I simply like junk. Before I started my tour, I had known that at intervals of every few days, I would have to stop at auto courts or motels, not so much to sleep, but for the sake of hot, luxurious bathing. In Rocinante, I heated water in a tea kettle and took sponge baths, but bathing in a bucket delivers little cleanliness and no pleasure whatsoever. A deep dish sit down in a tub with scalding water is a pure joy. Quite early on my trip, however, I invented a method for washing clothes, which you will go a long way to better. It came about this way. I had a large plastic garbage bucket with a cover and a bail. Since the normal movement of the truck tipped it over, I tethered it by a length of strong elastic rope of cotton-covered rubber to the clothes pole in my little closet, where it would jiggle to its heart's content without spilling. After a day of this, I opened it to dispose of the stuff of the roadside garbage and found the most thoroughly mixed and neated garbage can I have ever seen. I suppose all great inventions spring from such experience. The next morning, I washed the plastic bucket, put in 2 shirts, underwear, and socks, added hot water and detergent, and hung it by its rubber rope to the clothes pole where it jiggled and danced crazily all day. That night, I rinsed the clothes in a stream, and you've never seen clothes so clean. Inside Rocinante, I strung a nylon line close to the window and hung the clothes to dry. From that time on, my clothing was washed on one day of driving and dried on the next. I even went overboard and washed the sheets and pillowcases that way. So much for daintiness, but it didn't take care of hot baths. Not far outside of Bangor, I stopped at an auto court and rented a room. It wasn't expensive. The sign said, greatly reduced winter rates. It was immaculate. Everything was done in plastics. The floors, the curtain, tabletops of stainless, burnless plastic, lampshades of plastic. Only the bedding and the towels were of a natural material. I went to the small restaurant run in conjunction. It was all plastic, too. The table linen, the butter dish, the sugar and crackers were wrapped in cellophane, the jelly in a small plastic coffin sealed with cellophane. It was early evening, and I was the only customer. Even the waitress wore a sponge-off apron. She wasn't happy, but then she wasn't unhappy. She wasn't anything, but I don't believe anyone is nothing. There has to be something inside, if only to keep the skin from collapsing. This vacant eye, listless hand, this damask cheek, dusted like a donut with plastic powder, had to have a memory or a dream. On a chance, I asked, how soon you going to Florida? Next week, she said listlessly. Then something stirred in that aching void. Say, how do you know I'm going? Read your mind, I guess. She looked at my beard. You with a show? No. Then how do you mean, read my mind? Maybe I guessed. Like it down there? Oh, sure. I go every year. Lots of waitress jobs in the winter. What do you do down there? I mean, for fun. Oh, you know, just fool around. Do you fish or swim? Not much. I just fool around. I don't like that sand. Makes me itch. Make good money? It's a cheap crowd. Cheap? They'd rather spend it on booze. Then what? Then tips. Just like the same here with the summer people. Cheap. Strange how one person can saturate a room with vitality, with excitement. Then there are others, and this dame was one of them, who can drain off energy and joy, can suck pleasure dry and get no sustenance from it. Such people spread a grayness in the air about them. I'd been driving a long time, and perhaps my energy was low, and my resistance down. She got me. I felt so blue and miserable, I wanted to crawl into a plastic cover and die. What a date she must be. What a lover. I tried to imagine that last and couldn't. For a moment, I considered giving her a $5 tip, but I knew what would happen. She wouldn't be glad. She'd just think I was crazy. I went back to my clean little room. I don't ever drink alone. It's not much fun, and I don't think I will until I'm an alcoholic. But this night, I got a bottle of vodka from my stores and took it to my cell. In the bathroom, 2 water tumblers were sealed in cellophane sacks with the words, "These glasses are sterilized for your protection." Across the toilet seat, a strip of paper bore the message, "This seat has been sterilized with ultraviolet light for your protection." Everyone was protecting me, and it was horrible. I tore the glasses from their covers. I violated the toilet seal with my foot. I poured half a tumbler of vodka and drank it, and then another. Then I lay deep in hot water in the tub, and I was utterly miserable, and nothing was good anywhere. Charley caught it from me, but he is a gallant dog. He came into the bathroom, and that old fool played with the plastic bath mat like a puppy. What a strength of character, what a friend. Then he rushed to the door and barked as though I were being invaded, and if it hadn't been for all that plastic, he might have succeeded. I remember an old Arab in North Africa, a man whose hands had never felt water. He gave me mint tea in a glass so coated with use that it was opaque, but he had handed me companionship, and the tea was wonderful because of it. And without any protection, my teeth didn't fall out, nor did running sores develop. I began to formulate a new law describing the relationship of protection to despondency. A sad soul can kill you quicker, far quicker, than a germ. If Charley hadn't shaken and bounced and said I might have forgotten that every night he gets 2 dog biscuits and a walk to clear his head. I put on clean clothes and went out with him into the star-rattled night. And the aurora borealis was out. I've only seen it a few times in my life. It hung and moved with majesty and folds like an infinite traveler upstage in an infinite theater. In colors of rose and lavender and purple, it moved and pulsed against the night, and the frost-sharpened stars shone through it. What a thing to see at a time when I needed it so badly. I wondered for a moment whether I should grab that waitress and kick her behind out to look at it, but I didn't dare. She could make an eternity and infinity melt and run through your fingers. The air had a sweet burn of frost, and Charley, moving ahead, saluted in detail a whole row of clipped privet, and he steamed as he went. When he came back, he was pleased and glad for me. I gave him 3 dog biscuits, rumpled up the sterile bed, and went out to sleep in Rocinante. It's not unlike me that in heading toward the west I should travel east, and that has always been my tendency. I was going to Deer Isle for a very good reason. My longtime friend and associate, Elizabeth Otis, had been going to Deer Isle every year. When she speaks of it, she gets an otherworld look in her eyes and becomes completely inarticulate. When I planned my trip, she said, "Of course you'll stop at Deer Isle." "It's out of my way." "Nonsense," she said in a tone I know very well. I gathered from her voice and manner that if I didn't go to Deer Isle, I had better never show my face in New York again. She then telephoned Miss Eleanor Brace, with whom she always stays, and that was that. I was committed. All I knew about Deer Isle was that there was nothing you could say about it, but if I didn't go, I was crazy. Also, Miss Brace was waiting for me. I got thoroughly lost in Bangor, with traffic and trucks' horns blaring and lights changing. I vaguely remember that I should be on U.S. Highway 1, and I found it and then drove 10 miles in the wrong direction, back toward New York. I'd been given written directions on how to go, detailed directions, but have you ever noticed that instructions from one who knows the country get you more lost than you are, even when they are accurate? I also got lost in Ellsworth, which I am told is impossible. Then the roads narrowed, and the lumber trucks roared past me. I was lost almost all day, even though I found Blue Hill and Sedgwick. Late in the despairing afternoon, I stopped my truck and approached a majestic Maine State Trooper. What a man he was! Granite as any quarried about Portland, a perfect model for some future equestrian statue. I wonder if future heroes would be carved in marble jeeps or patrol cars. I seem to be lost, officer. I wonder if you could direct me? Where is it you want to go? I'm trying to go to Deer Isle. He looked at me closely, and when he was satisfied that I wasn't joking, he swung on his hips and pointed across a small stretch of open water. He didn't bother to speak. Is that it? He nodded from up to down and left his head down. Well, how do I get there? I've always heard that Maine people are rather taciturn, but for this candidate for Mount Rushmore to point twice in an afternoon was to be unbearably talkative. He swung his chin in a small arc in the direction I had been traveling. If the afternoon had not been advancing, I would have tried for another word from him, even if doomed to failure. Thank you, I said, and sounded to myself as though I rattled on forever. First there was a very high iron bridge, as high arched as a rainbow, and after a bit of low stone bridge built in the shape of an S-curve, I was on Deer Isle. My written directions said that I must take every road branch that turned right, and the word every was underlined. I climbed a hill and turned right into pine woods on a smaller road, and turned right on a very narrow road, and turned right again on wheel tracks on pine needles. It is so easy once you have been over it. I couldn't believe I would find the place, but in 100 yards there was a great old house of Miss Eleanor Brace, and there she was to welcome me. I let Charley out, and suddenly an angry streak of gray burned across the clearing in the pines and bucketed into the house. That was George. He didn't welcome me, and he particularly didn't welcome Charley. I never did rightly see George, but his sulking presence was everywhere. For George is an old gray cat who has accumulated a hatred of people and things so intense that even hidden upstairs he communicates his prayer that you will go away. If the bomb should fall and wipe out every living thing except Miss Brace, George would be happy. That's the way he would design a world if it were up to him. And he could never know that Charley's interest in him was purely courteous. If he did, he would be hurt in his misanthropy, for Charley has no interest in cats, whatever, even for chasing purposes. We didn't give George any trouble because for 2 nights we stayed in Rocinante, but I am told that when guests sleep in the house, George goes into the pine woods and watches from afar, grumbling his dissatisfaction and pouring out his dislike. Miss Brace admits that for the purposes of a cat, whatever they are, George is worthless. He isn't good company, he's not sympathetic, and he has little aesthetic value. Perhaps he catches mice and rats, I suggest helpfully. Never, said Miss Brace. Wouldn't think of it. And do you want to know something? George is a girl. I had to restrain Charley because the unseen presence of George was everywhere. In a more enlightened day, when witches and familiars were better understood, George would have found his, or rather her, end in a bonfire, because if ever there was a familiar and an envoy of the devil, a consorter with evil spirits, George is it. One doesn't have to be sensitive to feel the strangeness of Deer Isle, and if people who have been going there for many years cannot describe it, what can I do after 2 days? It is an island that nestles like a sulking against the breast of Maine, but there are many of those. The sheltered, darkling water seems to suck up a light, but I've seen that before. The pine woods rustle, and the wind cries over open country that is like Dartmoor. Stonington, Deer Isle's chief town, does not look like an American town at all, in place or in architecture. Its houses are layered down to the calm water of the bay. This town very closely resembles Lyme Regis on the coast of Dorset, and I would willingly bet that its founding settlers came from Dorset or Somerset or Cornwall. Maine speech is very like that in West Country, England. The double vowels pronounced there in Anglo-Saxon, but the resemblance is doubly strong on Deer Isle, and the coastal people below the Bristol Channel are secret people, and perhaps magic people. There's aught behind their eyes, hidden away so deep that perhaps they do not know they have it, and that same thing is so in Deer Islers. To put it plainly, this isle is like Avalon. It must disappear when you are not there. Or take, for example, the mystery of the coon cats, huge tailless cats with gray coats barred with black, which was why they are called coon cats. They are wild, they live in the woods, and are very fierce. Once in a while, a native brings in a kitten and raises it, and it's a pleasure to him, almost an honor. But coon cats are rarely even approximately tame. You take a chance of being racked or bitten all the time. These cats are obviously of Manx origin, and even interbreeding with the tame cats, they contribute taillessness. The story is that the great ancestors of the coon cats were brought by some ship's captain, and that they soon went wild. But I wonder where they get their size. They are twice as big as a Manx cat I ever saw. Could it be that they bred with the bobcat or the lynx? I don't know. Nobody knows. Down by the Stonington harbor, the summer boats were being pulled up for storage, and not only here but in other inlets nearby are very large lobster pounds crawling with the dark-shelled Maine lobsters from the dark water, which are the best lobsters in the world. Miss Brace ordered up 3, not more than 1.5 pounds, she said, and that night their excellence was demonstrated beyond a doubt. There are no lobsters like these, simply boiled with no fancy sauces, only melted butter and lemon, and they have no equals anywhere. Even shipped or flown alive away from their dark homes, they lose something. At a wonderful store in Stonington, half hardware store, half ship's chandler, I bought a kerosene lamp with a tin reflector for Rocinante. I had the fear I might somewhere run out of butane gas, and how would I read then in bed? I screwed the lamp bracket to the wall over my bed and trimmed the wick to make a golden butterfly of flame, and often on my trip I used it for warmth and color as well as light. It was exactly the same lamp that was in all the rooms at the ranch when I was a child, and no pleasanter light was ever designed, although old-timers say the whale oil makes a nicer flame. I have demonstrated that I can't describe Deer Isle. There's something about it that opens no door to words, but it stays with you afterward, and, more than that, things you didn't know you saw come back to you after you have left. One thing I remember very clearly, it might have been caused by the season with the quality of light or the autumn clarity. Everything stood out separate from everything else. A rock, a rounded lump of sea-polished driftwood on a beach, a roof line. Each pine tree was itself and separate, even if it was part of a forest. Drawing a very long bow of relationships, could I say that people have the same quality? Surely I never met such ardent individuals. I would hate to try to force them into anything they didn't want to do. I heard many stories about the Isle. I remember it is Isle and not Island, and was given much taciturn advice. I will repeat the only one admonishment from a native of Maine, and I will not put a name to that person for fear of reprisal. Don't ever ask directions of a Maine native, I was told. Why ever not? Somehow we think it's funny to misdirect people, and we don't smile when we do it, but we laugh inwardly. It's our nature. I wonder if that's true. I could never test it because through my own efforts I am lost most of the time without any help from anyone. I have spoken with approval, even affection, of Rocinante, but not of the pickup truck on which the camper top rode. It was a new model with a powerful V6 engine. It had automatic transmission and an oversized generator to give me lights inside the cabin if I should need them. The cooling system was so loaded with antifreeze that it could have withstood polar weather. I believe that American-made automobiles for passengers are made to wear out, so they must be replaced. This is not so with the trucks. A trucker requires many more thousands of miles of good service than a passenger car owner. He is not to be dazzled with trimming or fence or doodads, and he is not required by his status to buy a new model every year or so to maintain social face. Everything about my truck was made to last. Its frame was heavy, the metal rigid, the engine big and sturdy. Of course, I treated it well in matters of oil changes and greasing, and I did not drive it to its limit or force it to do acrobatics required of sports cars. The cab was double-walled, and a good heater had been installed. When I returned after more than 10,000 miles, the engine was only well broken in, and it never failed or stuttered even once during the journey. I moved up the coast of Maine, through Millbridge and Addison and Machias and Perry and South Robbinston until there was no more coast. I never knew or had forgotten how much of Maine sticks out like a thumb into Canada, with New Brunswick on the east. We know so little of our own geography. Why, Maine extends northward almost to the mouth of the St. Lawrence, and its upper border is perhaps 100 miles north of Quebec. And another thing I had conveniently forgotten was how incredibly huge America is. As I drove north through the little towns, the increasing forest rolling away to the horizon, the season changed quickly and all out of proportion. Perhaps it was my getting away from the steadying hand of the sea, and also perhaps I was getting very far north. The houses had snow-beaten look, and many were crushed and deserted, driven to earth by the winters. Except in the towns where there was evidence of a population which had once lived here and farmed and had its being and had been driven out. The forests were marching back, and where farm wagons once had been only the big lodging trucks roamed along. And the game had come back, too. Deer strayed on the roads, and there were marks of bear. There are customs, attitudes, myths, and directions, and changes that seem to be part of the structure of America, and I propose to discuss them as they were the first thrust on my attention. While these discussions go on, you are to imagine me bowling along on some little road, or bowled up behind a bridge, or cooking a big pot of lima beans and salt pork. And the first of these has to do with hunting. I could not have escaped hunting if I had wanted to, for open seasons spangle the autumn. We have inherited many attitudes from our recent ancestors who wrestled this continent as Jacob wrestled the angel and the pioneers won. From them we take a belief that every American is a natural-born hunter, and every fall a great number of men set out to prove that without talent, training, knowledge, or practice, they are dead shots with rifle or shotgun. The results are horrid. From the moment I left Sag Harbor, the guns were booming at the migrating ducks, and as I drove in Maine, the rifle shots in the forest would have frightened off any number of redcoats so long as they didn't know what was happening. This is bound to give me a bad name as a sportsman, but let me say that once I have nothing against killing of animals. Something has to kill them, I suppose. In my youth, I often crawled miles on my belly through freezing wind for the pure glory of blasting a mud hen, which even soaked in salt water made poor eating. I don't greatly care for venison or bear or moose or elk, except for the livers. The recipes, the herbs, the wine, the preparation that goes into a good venison dish would make an old shoe a gourmet's delight. If I were hungry, I would happily hunt anything that runs or crawls or flies, even relatives, and tear them down with my teeth. But it isn't hunger that drives millions of armed American males to forests and hills every autumn, as the high incidence of heart failure among the hunters will prove. Somehow the hunting process has to do with masculinity, but I don't quite know how. I know there are any number of good and efficient hunters who know what they are doing, but many more are overweight gentlemen, primed with whiskey and armed with high-powered rifles that shoot at anything that moves or looks as though it might, and their success is in killing one another may well prevent a population explosion. If the casualties were limited to their own kind, there would be no problem, but the slaughter of cows, pigs, farmers, dogs, and highway signs makes autumn a dangerous season in which to travel. A farmer in upper New York State painted the word cow in big black letters on both sides of his white bossy, but the hunters shot at it anyway. In Wisconsin, as I was driving through, a hunter shot at his own guide between the shoulder blades. The coroner, questioning this Nimrod, asked, "Did you think he was a deer?" "Yes, sir, I did." "But you weren't sure he was a deer?" "Well, no, sir, I guess not." With the rolling barrage going on in Maine, of course I was afraid for myself. 4 automobiles were hit during opening day, but mainly I was afraid for Charley. I know that a poodle looks very much like a buck deer to one of these hunters, and I had to find some way of protecting him. In Rocinante there was a box of red Kleenex that someone had given me as a present. I wrapped Charley's tail in red Kleenex and fastened it with rubber bands. Every morning I renewed his flag, and he wore it all the way west while bullets whined and whistled around us. This is not intended to be funny. The radios warned against carrying a white handkerchief. Too many hunters seeing a flash of white may have taken it for the tail of a running deer and cured a head cold with a single shot. But this legacy of the frontiersman is not a new thing. When I was a child on the ranch near Salinas, California, they had a Chinese cook who regularly made a modest good thing of it. On a bridge not far away, a sycamore's log lay on its side, supported by 2 of its broken branches. Lee's attention was drawn to this speckled fawn-colored chunk of wood by the bullet holes in it. He nailed a pair of horns to one end and then retired to his cabin until deer season was over. Then he harvested the lead from the old tree trunk. Some seasons he got 50 or 60 pounds of it. It wasn't a fortune, but it was wages. After a couple of years, when the tree was completely shot away, Lee replaced it with 4 gunny sacks of sand and the same antlers. Then it was even easier to harvest his crop. If he had put out 50 of them, it would have been a fortune, but Lee was a humble man who didn't care for mass production. So that is the end of the first part of part 2. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next part, chapter, whatever it may be.